The ground trembled softly at first, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift beneath the feet of the villagers. They had no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. To them, the earth had always been a reliable companion. But something was different this time. It was as if the village was holding its breath, waiting. And at that very moment, a horse born with an extraordinary gift, a connection to nature deeper than anyone could comprehend, began to sense what was coming. The horse had always been special. From the day it was born, there was an undeniable air of mystery about it. Its movements were fluid, graceful, almost as if it had a purpose beyond the usual instincts of its kind. People who lived near the horse's stable noticed that it would act differently at times, pacing restlessly, ears twitching, eyes wide with a strange intensity. Some would call it instinct, others would whisper about the supernatural. But there was one thing no one could deny. The horse could sense things that others couldn't. It could feel changes in the air, in the vibrations beneath the earth, in ways that humans couldn't begin to understand. For years, the horse's ability had been seen as a quirk, a mystery to be pondered by the few who noticed it. But as the years passed, the villagers began to notice something even stranger. The horse's behavior wasn't random. It had an uncanny knack for warning people about danger, though no one could quite explain how. When storms were coming, the horse would grow restless, pawing the ground and snorting nervously. When an animal was nearby, it would stand alert, watching the horizon with a sharpness that seemed to pierce the distance. Yet, it was when the ground shifted beneath the village that the horse's true ability would come to light. As the days went on, the earth grew restless. Minor tremors began to shake the village at irregular intervals, unsettling the villagers. The animals, too, were acting differently. Dogs barked at unseen things, cows grew agitated, and the birds stopped singing. But no one could pinpoint the cause, no one except the horse. It began to pace in its stable, moving in wide circles, its hooves striking the ground with a rhythm that was anything but natural. The villagers, used to its strange behavior, thought little of it at first. After all, the horse had always been different. But one day, just as the sun began to set, casting a soft golden hue over the village, the horse did something no one expected. It broke free from its stable. It galloped through the streets, its hooves pounding against the earth with a speed and urgency that was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The villagers, confused and alarmed, watched in disbelief as the horse moved in a straight line toward the edge of the village, where a dense forest loomed in the distance. Then, without warning, the ground shook violently. The tremors were stronger than anything the village had felt before. Buildings began to creak and groan, dust fell from the rooftops, and the trees outside the village swayed ominously. Panic spread quickly, and villagers rushed out of their homes, not knowing where to go or what to do. The horse, however, remained undeterred. It raced ahead, its movements now more purposeful than ever. The horse's path led it to the village's only escape route, a narrow bridge that connected the village to the outside world. The villagers, struggling to make sense of the chaos around them, began to follow the horse, unsure of its intentions, but instinctively trusting it. They could feel the air thickening with tension, could hear the distant rumble of the earth beneath them. It was as if the horse knew something they didn't, something no one could explain. As the horse reached the bridge, it stopped abruptly. The ground beneath it seemed to ripple as the horse lifted its head, ears straining, its eyes locked on the horizon. The villagers, now gathered behind it, could feel the tremors intensifying, a low growl in the earth that seemed to promise destruction. The horse stamped its hooves once, then twice, as if issuing a command. Then, without hesitation, it turned and ran back toward the village. The villagers, uncertain of what the horse was doing, hesitated for a moment before following suit. They weren't sure if they were making the right choice, but something deep inside told them that the horse knew what was coming, and they had to trust it. The village's escape route had already begun to buckle, the bridge creaking under the strain of the shifting earth. As they raced back into the heart of the village, the ground shook with such force that the air itself seemed to vibrate. Buildings cracked, dust and debris filled the air, and the sky darkened with the storm of the earth's fury. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. A horse, moving faster than it ever had before, galloped through the village, guiding the villagers with an instinct that was pure and true. It led them away from the areas most affected by the tremors, toward a large open field on the outskirts of the village. There, away from the collapsing structures and crumbling roads, they would be safe. As the last villager crossed the threshold into the field, the earth beneath them groaned and then split open. The village that had been their home for generations began to sink, consumed by the very ground it had stood on for so long. The horse stood at the edge of the field, watching as the destruction unfolded, its chest heaving with each breath. It had saved them just in time. But as the dust settled and the ground stilled, a new question began to form in the minds of the villagers. How had the horse known? And was this the end? Or had something even more dangerous been unleashed beneath the surface? The villagers huddled together, eyes wide with shock and disbelief, as the horse stood watch, its gaze fixed on the horizon. The earth was calm again, but for how long? The answers, it seemed, were just beginning to unfold, and as night fell over the ruined village, the mystery of the horse's extraordinary gift, its connection to the earth itself, remained unsolved. What lay beneath the surface? And would the villagers ever truly be safe again? The night was eerily quiet as the survivors of the village huddled together in the field, watching the smoke and dust rise into the sky where their homes had once stood. The earth had claimed the village so quickly, as though it had been waiting, patient and relentless. Now, the village was nothing more than rubble, a distant memory fading into the darkened horizon. The stars overhead seemed distant, cold, indifferent to the calamity below. The horse, standing at the edge of the field, didn't appear to notice the stillness. Its eyes remained fixed on the horizon, its every muscle tensed as if it were waiting for something to happen, something they couldn't see. The villagers, gathered in small groups around campfires, whispered nervously amongst themselves, their voices trembling with disbelief. How could this have happened? How had the earth suddenly turned against them? They had lived in harmony with the land for generations, their ancestors having cultivated the soil, built the village, and shaped their lives around the rhythms of nature. Now, it seemed as though nature itself had turned on them. And the horse, how had it known? It was as if it had understood something that the villagers could never have anticipated. The horse had always been different, of course, but no one had ever imagined that its strange abilities went beyond the simple instincts of an animal. It had always been a presence in the village, a creature that seemed to have its own unique understanding of the world. But in the wake of the disaster, it had become something more. It was no longer just an animal. It was a symbol of survival, of hope, and yet also a mystery that the villagers couldn't begin to comprehend. As the night wore on, a man and elder from the village approached the horse. He had been there long before the village had fallen, and he had witnessed many strange things in his life, but nothing like this. He had heard the stories of the horse's odd behavior, stories that had been passed down from one generation to the next. But now, with the village destroyed and his people lost, he couldn't help but wonder if those stories had been more than just folklore. Had the horse really known what was coming? And if so, how? The man approached it cautiously, as if the horse might somehow understand his thoughts, his questions. The horse didn't flinch as the elder drew closer. It simply stood there, its head raised, its gaze unwavering. The man felt a chill run down his spine, as if the horse was looking right through him. He had never believed in things beyond the natural world, had always dismissed the old tales as mere superstition. But now, in the face of such an unimaginable catastrophe, he began to question everything he had once known. He reached out a hand, slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might startle the animal. The horse's coat was warm beneath his fingers, its muscles tense as if it were still on high alert. But there was no fear in its eyes, no panic, only calm. The elder whispered softly, almost to himself, "What do you know? What are you trying to tell us?" He glanced over at the horse, which was standing quietly at the edge of the field. "This creature, it may be the key to understanding what has happened. If it can sense the earth's movements, then we must learn from it. We must understand its gift." The villagers were quiet, the weight of the elder's words sinking in. Many of them had grown up hearing the old stories about the land and the creatures that lived in harmony with it. But they had never truly believed in them. Not until now. Now, the mysteries that had once seemed like fairy tales were beginning to feel very real. Days passed, and the villagers began to rebuild what they could. They cleared debris, salvaged what remained of their belongings, and set up makeshift shelters. The horse, however, never left. It stood watch over the survivors, its presence a constant reminder of the strange events that had unfolded. The villagers tried to make sense of what had happened, but the answers remained elusive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the horse's strange behavior returned. It began to pace again, moving in wide circles, its hooves striking the ground with an intensity that set the air vibrating. The villagers watched in silent apprehension, sensing that something was wrong. The earth beneath them felt unsettled, as though it were shifting, preparing for something. The elder, now more certain than ever that the horse had a deeper connection to the land, approached it once again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He spoke to the horse as if it could understand him. "Tell me," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "What do you feel? What is coming?" The horse stopped its pacing and lifted its head, ears twitching as it gazed toward the distant mountains. The elder felt a chill run through him, as if the air had suddenly grown colder. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. He turned to the villagers, his face pale with fear. "It's coming again," he whispered. Something worse than before." The villagers, already on edge, began to panic. They had barely survived the first quake, and the thought of facing something even more destructive was too much to bear. But the horse stood still, its eyes fixed on the horizon, its body tense and alert. And then, as if on cue, the ground trembled once more. The vibrations were subtle at first, barely noticeable. But they quickly grew stronger, the earth beginning to shake with a force that left no doubt. A second quake was coming, and it would be even more powerful than the first. The horse bolted into action, galloping toward the edge of the field, urging the villagers to follow. The elder shouted for everyone to move quickly, to gather what they could and flee to safety. But this time, the villagers weren't sure where to go. The land was already betraying them. Nothing felt safe anymore. As they ran, the ground beneath them began to crack open, splitting apart with terrifying force. Buildings that had withstood the first tremor began to collapse, their foundations buckling under the weight of the earth's fury. The villagers could hear the earth groaning, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to echo from deep within the planet. The horse continued to race ahead, its pace unrelenting, as if it had a clear destination in mind. The villagers followed, their hearts pounding with fear, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The earth was angry, and no matter how hard they tried to escape, they couldn't outrun its wrath. The horse led them toward the mountains, the place where the land had always felt most secure. But as they neared the base of the mountains, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath them began to tremble violently, more intense than ever before. The sky darkened, and the air thickened with an unnatural heat. Something was wrong, far worse than they had ever imagined. The villagers, desperate and confused, turned to the elder, but his face was ashen, his eyes wide with fear. "The mountains," he whispered. "They've been hiding something. The horse knows, but it's too late now." And in that moment, as the earth groaned beneath them and the horse stood silent at the edge of the field, a terrifying thought gripped their hearts. Whatever had been unleashed beneath the surface of the earth had only just begun. The trembling of the earth didn't stop. In fact, it only grew worse, as if the land itself was fighting to release something trapped deep within its core. The villagers ran, their hearts pounding, trying to keep pace with the horse, but with every step they took, the ground seemed to become more unstable, more unpredictable. The earth wasn't just shaking, it was buckling, cracking, as though it was unraveling from the inside out. The horse, with its unmatched grace and strength, moved effortlessly ahead, guiding the villagers toward the mountains as the earth below them cracked open like an ancient wound. They had no choice but to follow, even though every instinct told them to turn and flee in a different direction, away from whatever darkness had been awakened. The mountains loomed ahead, towering and silent, their peaks obscured by the thickening fog that seemed to roll in from nowhere. The tension was palpable, thick as the air around them, and no one spoke as they moved through the chaos, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of safety. As the survivors reached the base of the mountain, they were met by a strange silence, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the devastation they had just escaped. The air felt charged with an unnatural energy, as though the world was holding its breath. The horse, however, didn't falter. It seemed to sense something the villagers couldn't. It stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine, its hooves scraping against the stone, its ears pricked in attention. The elder, still shaken by the earlier events, stepped forward, eyes wide with unease. "This is where it ends, isn't it?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The mountains have always hidden secrets. I should have known, but I didn't want to believe." A younger villager, someone who had grown up hearing the stories of the old times, approached the elder, his face a mixture of fear and determination. "What do you mean? What secrets?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the elder's gaze shifted from the horse to the ravine ahead. "I've heard the stories," the elder said, his voice tales of what lies beneath these mountains. Legends of creatures, things that have been waiting, hidden in the depths. And now, I think the earth has opened a door we were never meant to find. What the horse feels, what it's leading us to, it's not a gift. It's a warning. The younger man's face drained of color. A warning? But what about the village? The horse saved us. If it's a warning, then what are we supposed to do? His voice cracked with a mixture of confusion and desperation. The elder didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the ravine ahead, where the darkness seemed to deepen with each passing moment. The air around them grew heavier, charged with an energy that felt almost alive. I don't know, he admitted. But whatever it is, we can't run from it. We've already seen what the Earth is capable of. And if it's true, if this creature or force hidden beneath the mountains is real, then our survival doesn't depend on fleeing. It depends on understanding what we're dealing with. But the words barely seemed to settle in the air before the ground beneath them shook again. This time, the tremors were far more violent, a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The villagers staggered, struggling to keep their footing as the mountains seemed to rise and fall with each new wave of tremors. Dust and debris rained down from the cliffs above, and for a moment, the survivors feared the mountain itself might collapse. But the horse remained calm, standing at the ravine's edge, its gaze still fixed on the shadows within. The elder's voice cracked with urgency. We need to move. Now, without another word, the group began to scramble down the narrow path toward the ravine, their footsteps echoing in the silence that had once dominated the area. The path was steep and treacherous, but the horse seemed to know where to go, guiding the villagers with an almost unnatural precision. The further they descended, the darker it came, the air growing thick and cold as they reached the foot of the ravine, where the darkness seemed to have a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on them. The villagers paused at the edge, staring into the depths below. What lay hidden there? Was it a part of the land's natural formation, or something far older, more dangerous than they could ever have imagined? The young man who had spoken earlier looked around, his face twisted with fear. What are we supposed to find down there? He whispered. We don't even know what we're dealing with. The elder's voice was barely above a whisper, as though he feared the very air around them could hear him. We've been blind for too long. We didn't want to see the truth. But it's been here all along. A long, guttural growl reverberated from deep within the ravine, sending a chill through the group. It wasn't an animalistic growl. It was something much deeper, something that sounded as though the earth itself were trying to speak. The horse flinched at the sound, its eyes wide with fear. It pawed at the ground, snorting as it backed away from the edge. The villagers, their eyes wide with horror, began to back away as well. But the elder gripped the young man's arm, his gaze intense. We have no choice now, he said. We need to go deeper. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. But the horse's actions seemed to push them forward. With a nervous glance between them, the villagers began to follow the elder, descending into the ravine toward the source of the sound. They moved slowly, cautiously, as though the very air around them could collapse in on itself at any moment. As they descended further, the growls grew louder, more distinct. It was a sound that sent shivers down their spines, one that felt as though it was coming from some ancient, forgotten beast, something that had been buried for centuries, perhaps longer. The ground beneath their feet became slick with moisture, and the walls of the ravine seemed to close in around them, narrowing until they could barely move in single file. Then, as they reached the lowest point of the ravine, they found it. A massive opening in the earth, its edges jagged and sharp, leading down into an abyss that seemed to stretch forever. The air around it was thick with a heavy, oppressive heat, and the sound of the growling grew deafening. The horse, its eyes wide with terror, refused to go any closer, standing at the edge of the ravine, staring into the abyss as if it had seen something that the villagers could not. The elder stepped forward, his breath shallow, his hand trembling as he reached toward the edge. This is where it began, he said, his voice low and filled with dread. And now we must face it. But as the words left his mouth, the earth seemed to tremble once more violently than ever before. And from the depths of the abyss, a massive roar erupted, one so loud and powerful that it felt as though the very mountains themselves were shaking. The villagers, gripped by a sense of overwhelming fear, stumbled back. The horse, unable to move any further, turned and bolted, its hooves pounding against the earth as it raced back toward the ravine's entrance. The villagers, trapped in the shadow of whatever horror lay below, watched helplessly as the ground beneath them began to shake even harder, and the darkness from the depths seemed to rise toward them, consuming everything in its path. The elder's voice rang out, but it was drowned by the roaring from the abyss. "It's not over," he shouted. "It's only just begun." And as the first tremors of the new quake shook the ravine, the villagers realized with growing terror that what they had awakened from the depths was not just an earthquake. It was something far more ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment to rise. The ground trembled with such intensity that it felt as if the very foundations of the earth were breaking apart. Every step the villagers took seemed to make the ground beneath them shudder violently, and the once quiet ravine now echoed with the deafening roar of something stirring deep within the earth. The horse, still distant and standing at the edge, seemed to sense the rising danger. It whinnied loudly, its mane flowing in the wind, its body tense and trembling, as if it too understood that something far more dangerous was about to awaken. The elder, wide-eyed with fear, gripped the young man's arm, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise. "We have to leave now. The earth is rebelling, but this is worse than anything we imagined." The legends were right. There's something in the depths, something that the earth has kept hidden for ages. And it's angry. The young man tried to steady his breathing, his heart racing. He looked at the elder, his face a mix of disbelief and terror. "What is it? What are we dealing with?" But before the elder could answer, the earth groaned again, deeper this time. It wasn't just a tremor or a shake anymore. It was the unmistakable sound of something massive shifting beneath them. The walls of the ravine seemed to close in, pressing tighter with each passing moment. Rocks and dirt began to fall from above, and the air grew thick with the stench of sulfur and decay. A cold sweat ran down the young man's back as he realized that they weren't just facing a disaster. They were facing something that had been trapped for far too long and had now been released. Suddenly, a massive shadow shifted in the depths below. It was swift and powerful, as though the earth itself had sprung to life. The roar that followed was unlike anything they had heard before, louder, more intense, and filled with an unnatural fury. It was a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of the earth, and it echoed through the ravine like the voice of a beast, long forgotten, now reawakening. The villagers were paralyzed with fear. Some of them tried to retreat, but the ground beneath them buckled and split apart, forcing them to stagger, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mountains had trapped them in this ravine, the dark abyss ahead, and the beast rising behind. The young man turned to the elder, his breath ragged, a question forming on his lips, but no words came out. The elder's face was etched with deep concern, but it was clear that even he didn't know what to do now. "We're running out of time," the elder muttered, his eyes scanning the ravine. "We can't escape this. Not unless we understand what we're dealing with." But the sound from the abyss grew louder. The earth was no longer just shaking, it was ripping apart, as if the very bones of the land were being pulled from within. The roar came again, even more deafening, and the shadows in the darkness grew more distinct, more terrifying. Something was rising. Without warning, the ground beneath them shifted violently, and a massive tremor sent everyone crashing to the ground. The villagers struggled to regain their footing, fear bubbling up inside them as the earth seemed to collapse around them. Then, a terrible, otherworldly screech erupted from the depths so loud, so powerful, that it felt as though it was tearing at the fabric of the world itself. The horse, who had been at the edge of the ravine, suddenly broke free from its stance. With a burst of speed, it bolted toward the villagers, its eyes wide with panic. It galloped past them, charging straight for the dark abyss at the heart of the ravine, as if it were drawn to something it could neither resist nor understand. The villagers watched in stunned silence, unable to move as the horse vanished into the shadows below, its hooves echoing in the vast emptiness. The young man felt a lump rise in his throat. "It knows," he whispered, though no one could hear him over the chaos. The elder gripped his arm, trying to steady him, but the fear was almost too much to bear. The horse wasn't just running. It was leading them. Or maybe it was trying to escape, just like them. And then, as if the earth had been holding its breath, the true horror revealed itself. From the depths of the ravine, a massive, monstrous shape began to rise, a creature so enormous, so twisted that it defied the imagination. It was like nothing any of them had ever seen, a grotesque, shifting mass of shadow and stone, with eyes glowing an unnatural fiery red. The very earth around it seemed to bend and twist with its every movement. The villagers staggered back, their hearts pounding in their chests, their bodies paralyzed with dread. The roar that followed was so deafening that it shook the very bones of the earth, and the ground beneath them cracked wide open, revealing deep, dark chasms that seemed to go on forever. It was as though the earth itself was being ripped apart, and whatever creature now rose from it was the cause of the destruction. The elder's voice, barely a whisper, barely audible over the deafening noise, was filled with a mix of awe and terror. "This is it," he said. "The thing that has been hiding beneath the surface, the thing the earth has kept sealed away. We've awakened it, and now we have no choice but to face it." But how? How could they face something so powerful, so ancient, that even the earth trembled in its presence? The creature's massive form continued to rise, blocking out the sky as it towered over the ravine, casting a long, terrifying shadow over everything in its path. The ground trembled more violently now, and the very air felt alive with danger. The villagers huddled together, looking around in panic, trying to find some way to fight back, some way to survive. But the creature seemed unstoppable, an embodiment of destruction itself. Every move it made seemed to shake the earth, sending waves of energy rippling out from its center. The horse, which had fled into the shadows of the abyss, reappeared suddenly, charging back toward the villagers. Its eyes were wild with fear, its body covered in sweat, but it was moving faster than ever before. It was as though it knew the only way to stop the creature, the only way to save the village, was to return. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the horse galloped toward them, its hooves pounding the earth like thunder, its eyes locked on the towering monster that now loomed over them. The elder, shaking with fear, reached out to stop the horse, but it was already past him, racing toward the creature at the ravine's edge. The villagers, gripped by a sense of desperation, followed, unsure of what was to come, but knowing they had no other choice. They had to face the thing that had been hidden beneath the earth for so long, no matter the cost. And as the horse drew closer to the creature, it paused for just a moment, its head held high, its eyes narrowing in determination. The elder's voice rang out again, louder this time, filled with something other than fear, something akin to hope. "This is our fight now. If we don't stop it, everything we know will be lost. We must do this together. With a final, deafening roar, the creature surged forward, and everything the villagers had feared was about to come crashing down around them. But as the battle drew near, they still didn't know how they would win, or if they would survive at all. The ground trembled even more violently, as if the very air around them was alive, crackling with an energy too powerful to contain. The creature, a mass of shifting shadows and jagged stone, loomed larger with every second, its glowing red eyes now fixed firmly on the villagers. They had no time to think, no time to plan. The battle was no longer just a fight for survival. It had become a desperate, frantic attempt to prevent something catastrophic from happening. The horse, still charging toward the creature, had now stopped at the edge of the ravine, its body trembling with fear, but its stance unwavering. It was as if it had reached a point where it knew something the villagers did not, a truth about the creature, a key to its defeat. But the elders, the villagers, they didn't know what that truth was. The world around them was too chaotic, too unpredictable, and the growing sense of dread settled in their bones like a heavy, inescapable weight. The elder, his face pale but resolute, stepped forward. "We cannot fight this. Not as we are now," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "There's something we must do, something we've been too afraid to acknowledge all this time." The young man, his thoughts swirling in confusion and fear, grabbed the elder's arm. "What are you talking about? We have no time for old tales. That thing will destroy us all." The elder's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, the young man saw the weariness in his gaze. "It's not just a tale. This creature, it's tied to something far older, something buried beneath the earth for reasons we do not understand. If we are to stop it, we must awaken what has been hidden beneath us." The words sent a chill down the young man's spine. "Awaken? You want us to release more of it?" The elder nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something beneath the creature, something even older, even more powerful. We've been living on top of it for generations. But the time has come. If we do not call upon it, if we do not bring it to the surface, the land will be destroyed. The creature will consume everything. It will not stop until there is nothing left." The young man was left speechless, his mind racing. But there was no time to question the elder. The sound of the creature's roar shook the air around them again, louder now, deafening. It was a primal sound, one that seemed to reach into their souls, promising destruction, chaos, and death. The villagers, their faces twisted with fear, began to back away from the creature, their instincts screaming for them to flee. But the elder stepped forward, his voice filled with authority. "We must do this now. There's no other choice. It's the only way." Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open once more, and a blinding light burst forth from the depths of the ravine, causing the villagers to shield their eyes in terror. From the darkness below, a surge of raw, primal energy began to rise, thick, swirling. The air grew colder, the energy heavier, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its breaking point. And then, from the light, a new shape began to emerge, a figure that was both familiar and terrifying. Something neither fully human nor fully beast, but something in between. The villagers gasped in horror and awe as the shape materialized before them, its form shifting like smoke, its eyes glowing with an intensity that burned through the very air. This was the creature the elder had spoken of, the one they had feared, the one that had been buried for centuries beneath the earth. It was not just a force of nature, not just a simple monster, but something ancient, something with a purpose far greater than anything they could have imagined. It was not a creature of destruction. It was a creature of balance, of judgment, and its return marked the tipping point of a great and terrible shift. The air thickened with the power emanating from the creature. The ground beneath them continued to quake, as though the earth was groaning under the weight of its return. But just as the young man opened his mouth to ask what this creature was, the elder held up his hand, signaling for silence. "This is it," the elder said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "The time has come for us to choose our path. We have awoken the balance of the earth. The creature above is not our enemy. It is the force that has been unleashed. Our actions, our presence here have brought it to life. But the force below us, it is the protector, the guardian." The young man's mind raced, trying to make sense of the elder's words. He couldn't fathom it. How could the creature above them be anything other than a force of destruction? The very ground had cracked open as it had risen. The earth itself was screaming in agony. How could that be a force of balance? But before he could ask, the elder continued. "This is a fight for the earth itself. We are caught in the middle of a conflict we do not fully understand. The creature above represents the forces of chaos, those who would see the earth consumed and undone. The force below represents the natural balance. We must awaken it fully if we are to have any hope of surviving." The young man looked down at the dark figure that had now fully materialized before them, a towering, ethereal being, its body shifting and undulating like smoke, yet its presence as solid as the mountains themselves. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, an embodiment of raw, primal power, a being of ancient wisdom and destructive might. The creature above, though, was pure, unrelenting force, its energy radiating with malice. For a moment, there was silence. The villagers stood frozen, as if they were watching the dawn of an apocalypse unfold before them. The horse, still trembling at the edge of the ravine, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. It whinnied softly, its gaze never leaving the dark abyss where the force now waited. And then, without warning, the creature above let out a deafening roar, shaking the entire ravine. The air thickened with the sound, reverberating like thunder, as if it were challenging the guardian below to rise, to face it. The ground cracked further, deeper now, as if the earth itself was struggling to hold the two forces in balance. The tension was palpable, and the villagers found themselves standing at the crossroads of history, facing a decision that could determine not only their fate, but the fate of the entire world. And in that moment of perfect chaos, just as the forces of nature prepared to collide, the second plot twist struck. The ground beneath them began to collapse, not in random tremors, but with purpose. The earth was splitting, pulling apart, as if it had a mind of its own. The elder's face paled. "It's already begun," he whispered. "The balance is shifting. We don't have much time." The creatures above and below had begun to fight, their power clashing with an intensity that threatened to tear the earth apart. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome was anything but certain. Would they survive the battle of the ages, or would they be consumed by the forces they had unknowingly set in motion? The ground shook one final time, as if it were a breath being held in suspense. The immense roar of the creature above filled the air, its fury directed at the guardian that had emerged from the depths. The two forces, once so distant, were now locked in a battle so intense that the very air seemed to crackle with the energy they unleashed. The villagers, now on the precipice of destruction, could do nothing but watch as the earth itself seemed to writhe in agony beneath them. The elder's voice rang out above the chaos. "We must stand together. We cannot let the earth tear itself apart." But his words were barely heard over the tumult. Force below, the ancient protector, began to surge forward, its form shifting, solidifying, and becoming more tangible with each passing second. But the creature above wasn't backing down. With every roar, every thrash, it tore the very sky itself asunder, sending shockwaves through the ravine. The young man's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the earth beneath him, feel its pulse as if it was alive. He turned to the villagers, their faces etched with fear and confusion. We need to trust the elder. We need to awaken the full power of the guardian below. But it wasn't enough. No matter how much they tried to move closer, the force of the two creatures kept pushing them back, each one more violent than the last. The horse, ever faithful, stood at the edge of the ravine, its gaze fixed on the fight, as though it knew exactly what had to be done. The young man watched as the horse moved toward the epicenter of the battle, its body trembling but determined. The elder's face twisted with both fear and determination. "It has come to this," he muttered. "We have no choice but to join the fight, to give everything we have to protect the balance." The villagers, drawn together by a mixture of fear and hope, began to chant, following the elder's lead. The words they spoke were ancient, words that had been passed down through generations, words that were meant to call upon the power of the earth itself. But even as they chanted, it seemed as though the creatures were pushing back harder, their power growing exponentially with every moment. Suddenly, the earth beneath them cracked open, sending a tremor so strong it sent the young man to his knees. The light from the abyss flared brighter, almost blinding them, as a massive surge of energy erupted from the depths, colliding with the force from above. It was like the earth itself had opened its veins, allowing all the power it had been holding back for centuries to flood into the ravine. And then, in the eye of the storm, everything went silent. The young man stood up, his body aching from the shockwave, his eyes wide with disbelief. The creatures were still, their energy suspended in a rare moment of balance. The guardian, now fully awakened, stood tall against the massive beast above, its form a towering figure of pure energy. The two forces faced each other, their power crackling in the air between them. But there was no more chaos, no more fighting. It was as if the earth itself had finally decided what to do, what to let go of, what to keep, and the forces had reached an understanding. The creature from above, its shadowy form now fading, began to recede, its energy dissipating into the earth. The guardian stood resolute, its form glowing with a soft, ethereal light, the balance restored. The villagers, wide-eyed, dared not move. They had no words, only the awe and fear of what they had just witnessed. The young man turned to the elder, his heart pounding in his chest. "Is it over?" he whispered. The elder's voice was quiet, but there was a deep sense of relief in it. For now, the balance has been restored. The earth will heal. But just as they began to breathe in relief, a sudden flash of light appeared on the horizon, almost blinding in its intensity. A shape, a shadow, rose on the far side of the ravine, one that seemed almost familiar, yet entirely different. It was too large, too powerful to be anything that had come before. The young man's stomach sank as the realization hit him like a wave. This was not over. The battle they had just witnessed was only the beginning. Something even darker, something even more powerful, was waiting just beyond the horizon, lurking in the shadows. And with it came the chilling thought, if the earth had healed, had it truly defeated its enemies? Or had it simply been waiting for something far worse to emerge? The guardian, its form still glowing softly, began to fade, retreating back into the depths from which it had come. But before it disappeared completely, its glowing eyes locked onto the young man, as if offering a warning, or perhaps a promise. He wasn't sure. He couldn't be. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their breaths coming in uneven gasps as the ground beneath them settled, no longer trembling. The danger had passed, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. Something was coming, something they hadn't prepared for. And the young man knew in his heart that it wasn't just the earth they had to worry about anymore. It was everything. As the last echoes of the battle faded into the distance, the young man turned toward the horizon. The shadow in the distance grew darker, closer, and the chilling sound of something ancient stirring sent a shiver down his spine. No, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But now he understood one thing. They had survived the first wave. And whatever was coming next, whatever horrors lay ahead, they would face it together, prepared, united, and determined to protect the balance, no matter the cost. The young man stood, staring at the dark horizon, his thoughts swirling with uncertainty. Quiet that followed the battle was eerie, as though the earth itself was waiting for something, waiting for the inevitable. The villagers began to stir, their expressions a mix of relief and confusion, as if they weren't entirely sure whether they had truly won or if this was just a momentary reprieve. But the young man couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. He could hear the soft whinny of the horse behind him, its presence comforting, but also reminding him of the fragility of the moment. The creature had been the catalyst for all of this. Without its warning, they would have never had the chance to stand and fight. But even now, standing in the quiet aftermath, he could feel the pulse of danger, of something unfinished, lingering just beneath the surface. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. "What do we do?" The elder turned to him, his expression softening. "We wait," he said simply. "The earth has shown us its power, but it is still in flux. Creature above is gone for now, but its shadow lingers. There is something that must be done, something we must prepare for." The young man frowned. "Prepare for what?" The elder paused, his gaze far off as if contemplating the vastness of the situation. "The creature you saw, the one that emerged from the depths, it is not the only one. There are others, buried beneath the earth, waiting for their time to rise. And when they do, the battle will not be against just one force, but a struggle for the very survival of the world." The words sent a chill through the young man's spine. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it from the elder made it feel all the more real. The battle they had fought was just the beginning, and now they had to prepare for something far worse, something that could threaten everything they held dear. "What can we do?" the young man asked, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "How do we stop it?" The elder turned to him, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "We must learn from what we have seen. The balance is delicate, and the forces of nature are not to be trifled with. The guardian has returned to its resting place, but it will not be enough to stop what is coming. We must understand the earth, its true nature, and how to harness its power. Only then will we be ready." The young man nodded, feeling the gravity of the elder's words. He had always known that there was more to the earth than what could be seen on the surface, but now he understood just how deep that connection ran. It was more than just the land they lived on. It was a living, breathing entity, and they were just a small part of its intricate web. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, the young man turned to the villagers, who had gathered in a circle around the elder. They were listening intently, their faces etched with a mix of fear and determination. Some were still recovering from the shock of the battle, but there was a growing sense of unity among them, a recognition that they had been through something extraordinary together. The elder raised his hand, and the villagers fell silent. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a new chapter. We have seen the power of the earth, and now it is time for us to learn how to live in harmony with it. Only then will we be ready for what comes next. The young man could feel the weight of those words, and though there was fear in his heart, there was also a sense of resolve. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. They all were. The battle had taught them something vital. They were not alone. The earth itself was watching over them, guiding them, and they would not stand idly by. They would fight. In the days that followed, the villagers began to rebuild, to come together in a way they never had before. The earth, though scarred, seemed to heal with them. The tension in the air slowly began to lift, but the young man could not shake the sense that the quiet would not last forever. He spent many nights staring at the horizon, watching for any sign of the creatures that might rise from the earth once again. But nothing came. At least, not yet. The horse, too, remained by his side, ever watchful, as if it knew that the fight was far from over. It seemed to understand that its role was not yet complete, that there was more to do, more to protect. The bond between them had grown stronger over the course of their shared journey, and the young man knew that, together, they could face whatever the future held. One evening, as he sat near the edge of the ravine, lost in thought, the elder approached him once again. "It is time," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "We have learned much, but there is more to discover. It is time for us to seek out the knowledge of the earth, its ancient secrets." The young man stood, his heart racing. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty. "What do you mean? Where do we begin?" The elder's eyes were filled with a mixture of wisdom and determination. "There are places, ancient sites, where the knowledge of the earth is preserved. We must find them places where the balance is still intact, where the guardian's power can be felt. There, we will learn what we need to know to prepare for the future." The young man nodded, his resolve strengthening. He knew that this was the next step in their journey, and though it was uncertain, he was ready. They all were.